One of the main drivers behind Parks Canada's initiative to rewrite more than 200 plaques at historic sites is the 2015 report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission (TRC), which recommended Canada develop a reconciliation framework for heritage and commemoration. The TRC was established as part of the Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement to document the history and impacts of the residential school system on Indigenous peoples in Canada. The TRC issued 94 calls to action to redress the legacy of residential schools and advance the process of reconciliation. Among these calls to action, number 79 specifically urged the federal government to work with Indigenous peoples to revise the policies and criteria that guide commemoration in Canada. The TRC also called for a review of existing commemorative monuments, plaques, and other markers to address historical inaccuracies and incorporate Indigenous perspectives. Parks Canada responded to these calls by launching a 3-year program to re-examine and rewrite the plaques that the Historic Sites and Monuments Board used to point out places deemed important to understanding Canada's past. The agency also committed to advance the goal of managing heritage places in a manner that reflects the spirit and intent of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, advances reconciliation as guided by the TRC report, and implements Section 35 rights, treaty obligations, and related commitments. According to Parks Canada, many of the existing plaques are based on outdated assumptions about Canadian history that have excluded Indigenous people, among others. Some of them also use antiquated language, such as Indian or Eskimo, or ignore Indigenous contributions to the sites. Some of them also reflect controversial beliefs held by historical figures who are commemorated. For example, one of the plaques slated for rewrite is for John A. Macdonald, one of the fathers of Confederation and Canada's first Prime Minister. Macdonald is widely criticized for his role in implementing the residential school system, suppressing Indigenous resistance, and imposing starvation policies on Indigenous communities. Another plaque that needs revision is for Archibald Bellonet, otherwise known as Grey Owl, a British-born writer and conservationist who pretended to be an Indigenous person and adopted a false identity.